truths of the night, once again, we gather in search of the truth, dark, and mystery. It's the Drunk Turkey Show.
Big development today in the investigation into the murders of 4 University of Idaho students. According to state and local officials and court documents, 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger has been arrested. He was arrested and arraigned this morning in Pennsylvania.
We have new details on what Bryan Kohberger was doing right before his arrest. Police say as a tactical team burst in to arrest the Idaho murder suspect, he was in pajamas and latex gloves, stuffing trash into Ziploc bags.
Hey, greetings from the year 3000. It still sucks. This is Phil J. Pride, and you're listening to the Drunken Turkey Show. Your one stop for this sort of thing. Hit that button, like and subscribe. You know what to do, just like every other podcast.
Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, just like every other podcast. What is up, everybody? I hope you guys had a fantastic Thanksgiving and Turkey Day with your friends and family. I also hope everybody had a safe day out there on Black Friday and saved some money throughout the day. I know me and the wife and the baby, we went out and got some things, and we went out a little bit later. I still got the things that we were looking for. And I think my wife was a little bit disappointed in one of the gifts that she got, or one of the free things that you would get from one of the stores that we got. But all in all, it was a good day, and I hope it was a good day for you guys as well. Today, what we're going to be doing and talking about is the Bryan Kohberger case. There's a new document that was dropped. None too crazy or anything too telling, so to speak. We'll break it down. We'll look at it. And, maybe perhaps there is something there. Maybe there isn't. And then we'll go forward from there. If anybody has any questions or anything like that, please put up a couple of stars there. Members, I'll answer your questions. Obviously, super chats, I'll get to those as soon as I can, as soon as possible. I mean, the other ones, you know what to do. All right, let's break it down. Let's get into this new document. Here it is. It is the motion to seal defendant's amended memorandum and exhibits in support of Frank's hearing. So they want to submit, they want to, this is the defense who's put this up there, who's wanting to have these items sealed, which I understand. Anything that comes out of this, especially if, let's just say that let's just say they do end up getting some of these things suppressed. They don't want the public or the media or anybody else to know what were the items they were trying to suppress, because that could then be pretty, maybe prejudiced towards Bryan Kohberger's case, or not go in his favor, and that could taint the jury. Because if they were to hear some of these things, like let's just say, and I'll throw out an example, in his apartment they found one of so they had the cell phone, the computer tower. Let's just say in the apartment they found something on that computer tower. They don't want whatever information that was found out there, especially if that evidence isn't going to see the day of light or the light of day in court. And so you don't want that out there if you're the defense team. If you're the prosecution, this tells me, or for anybody that's looking at this, is that this is going to be very different than what the Richard Allen case was like, where in the Richard Allen case, they had a Frank's hearing. They had documents dropped. They didn't want those sealed. They wanted people to know why they wanted the Frank's hearing. They had an alternative theory. They had other suspects. They thought something else may have happened, and they had, some sort of proof or evidence or something that kind of backed their theory, whether it was inconsistent or not. They had something to back their theory up. And obviously, in my opinion, I don't think it was much anything that held any weight there, but they did have information. This isn't going to be the case here. It sounds like the defense is going to be arguing things like they shouldn't have had a warrant for this, or they shouldn't have had a warrant for that. Not necessarily that they have another theory in mind as far as how these victims' lives were lost, or they don't have another explanation or an alternate person theory. None of those things, if if you're wanting to, end up suppressing the information and the evidence that you intend on using in the Frank's motion. So it's two facets. It's probably a combination of both. The what they're going to be arguing about. If it ends up being suppressed, they don't want it to get out there, and they also doesn't seem like they're going to have much of a defense outside of, well, we're just going to argue at this point that you shouldn't or shouldn't have done these things, or how you got this information or evidence isn't correct. Nothing really that says he's innocent, in my opinion. But again, that's not his job. His job isn't to prove his innocence. I just think when you have a robust amount of evidence against you, and you have DNA in the house, you have video of his vehicle out there, you have cell phone information that tells you that his phone was off during the crime, when it was committed, you have it when it turns on, it's outside of where, the crime had occurred, potential DNA in the car. I know a lot of people looked at one of my videos a couple of days ago because I said DNA's, victims' DNA in the car, not realizing that's my statement. That's my statement that I made in that video, that they found victims' DNA in their car, and I laid down the theory and the reason why I believe that seems to be the case. Now, I could be wrong, but I haven't been. Not in anything thus far. I mean, but like I said, I could be wrong. But when it comes to tactics and arguments and what has become, what's the word I'm looking for? Important to and how they plan on utilizing certain bits of information. I've explained it months and almost years ago, if not over a year ago. A lot of the stuff that they were going to be arguing and what was going to be coming out in these motions, in the Frank motions, what the argument for the defense was going to be. I called that over a year ago, and receipts are there. You guys can go back. I think that there's DNA in that car. I don't think you throw out the car if there's something in there that could be exculpatory, meaning that if there was no DNA in the car, there was nothing that tied Bryan Kohberger to those victims. That is, the lack of evidence is evidence, and the lack of evidence in that situation doesn't necessarily mean it is, but it could lead one to believe that it is unlikely for somebody to take the lives of 4 people and not transfer a little bit of DNA into their car. Now, perhaps maybe they have evidence of a cleanup, and a significant cleanup at that, all over the place. And maybe there is no DNA in the car. But that right there would be a huge piece of evidence. And that right there would be also something that maybe perhaps is big enough so that they don't want that information to be in trial or for the jury to hear it. So in my opinion, it's one of two things. There's a real clear sign of a cleanup, and or there's small amounts of DNA in the car. And it could be both. It could be both. And in those situations, obviously that's the reason why you want to get the car thrown out. But if there was none of that, you could not see any, because I know a lot of people are going to go in the comment section, well, we haven't heard that, we don't know that. I mean, just because you don't know that doesn't mean that it isn't real. It's not like, oh, all of a sudden when you, the random viewer, learn something, is it that becomes real? It's not how things work. You're not that special. And so just because we don't know what they have or don't have doesn't mean that it's not there. And it's pretty easy to put 2 and 2 together when you look at what they're suppressing, what they're not suppressing, and how they're suppressing it, and what evidence that people think that is out there that could be exculpatory to Bryan Kohberger. And it's not true. It's not real, because they're trying to suppress those things. The only reason you would try to suppress that information is if there was something equal or even more damning than the DNA in the car. It has to outweigh that mere fact. So, for instance, and I think Tim, and I'm not picking on him, he brought up a good point that maybe perhaps they want to take out the vehicle because of its description and what's seen in the video and all these other things. And I said, yeah, that could be true. However, they did admit that there was 22,000 light vehicles in the area stuff like that. I mean, obviously, I think you can kind of narrow it down to Bryan Kohberger's car. But if there was no DNA in that vehicle, why throw out the car that all you have is a picture of or a video of? There's no license plate on there or anything like that. Now, granted, when you tie it with the phone records and the locations and everything else, it's going to be pretty easily tied together. But even if he was in that town that night and you don't have a video of him going into that house, even though his DNA is in that house, you would think that no DNA in the car or a sign of a cleanup would outweigh just a mere video of a vehicle in the area. So to me, it has to be bigger than that. It has to be bigger than the fact that there possibly could not be DNA in the car. Because if it's not bigger than that, that's a pretty big piece of evidence for your client if you're the defense. You're going to want to utilize that information. Same thing with the cell tower information. The cell tower stuff, if you truly have somebody that's going to say he's somewhere else, why would you throw out that exculpatory evidence? You know, if Cy Ray is going to say he was at the Wawa Park and it was impossible for him to be there and at the King Road residence at the time he was at the park, and yet you can't utilize that information. It's just something that doesn't make sense to me. But let's actually read this. So comes Bryan Kohberger and by and through his attorneys of record and with no objection from the Latah County Prosecutor's Office, and hereby moves the court for an order to seal the defendant's amended memorandum and exhibits in support of the Franks hearing. The defense will file an amended memorandum in support of the corresponding exhibits, conveniently in person, and under seal on 11/26/2024. Courtesy copies will be provided to the parties on 11/26/2024. This motion is pursuant to yada, yada, yada. The documents contain facts and statements that might threaten or endanger life and safety of individuals. It is necessary to preserve the right for a fair trial, and disclosure would constitute an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. Additionally, both motions contain materials and references and information and proceedings that are subject to be sealed. And so I know a lot of people were looking at this and thinking, you know, hey, who is it going to endanger the safety of? And does that mean there's other people? And no, not necessarily. What they're doing is they're putting in the law, right? And they're putting in the law in its totality, meaning that these are the reasons why this could be in favor. It only has to have one. You know, it says, this motion made pursuant to ICAR 32I2 D and E and IC B and C, because one, the documents contain facts. Two, yeah, so this is just one of these have to pertain to this this specific place. So for instance, if I were to say, like when we look at the Richard Allen case and they try to throw on, or you know how they charged him for 4 murders, it was 2 against the person and 2 that were felony, also against the person, but with the intent or the added aspect to it of kidnapping and a bunch of other things, right? It was multitudes of things that made that case be chargeable. And it wasn't that you had to have them all. It was just that you had to have one. And the kidnapping in that situation, in my opinion, was the agitator to add on the felony murder case on top of it. And that's kind of going to be like on this point. They're putting the entire law there, and you don't necessarily need to have every one of those things be crossed out. It only has to have one. And so, but could there be a life of safety of individuals? You know, the only individuals that I'm aware of that are going to probably be spoken, coming out in this court, and that doesn't mean that I know all of them. Obviously, there's going to be some experts going back and forth, but I think we're going to hear about from some students about Bryan Kohberger and his actions and his behaviors leading up to the murders and afterwards. I think we're going to hear about maybe some other things that he may have done that can show a path of escalation. And then we're probably going to hear, when it comes to this case, what else are we going to hear? We're going to hear, like I said, the experts' testimony from them. I'm not necessarily sure we're going to hear any witness testimony outside of maybe the DoorDash driver, and that's just my speculation. I don't know if the DoorDash driver is going to be a part of this case or not, but the DoorDash driver is in the probable cause affidavit for a reason. You know, it's not really necessary to put that information in there. You know what I'm saying? Because this is the probable cause for the arrest of Bryan Kohberger, so it's really not that important to put it into the probable cause affidavit. Then again, they might be just trying to establish a timeline of things like, hey, this is what happened. This is what happened. DoorDash driver was there, who reported this information that they gave their food to Xana, or at least the order was for Xana. And so those things are there. So it's probably just to establish a timeline. But could the DoorDasher have seen something? Maybe she saw the white Elantra. And I'm saying she because that's been the rumor, is that it was a female. I don't necessarily know if that's true or not. But let's just say that she did see something. You might see that witness come forward. I'm not necessarily sure you're going to see any witnesses, you know, that say something different about Bryan Kohberger. Maybe you will. I don't know. I'm not sure what the defense is going to bring out except experts. You know, it doesn't sound like they have. I mean, they'll probably bring on somebody that knows Bryan Kohberger, but that's more in a different phase, you know, to try to build his character up a little bit. But outside of that, I'm not sure what witnesses will be brought up by the defense. And again, this is they could have quite a few people up there that I have no idea. This is just me thinking out loud about it. But who would be somebody that would be individual that'd be safe and or their life or safety would be an issue? Maybe perhaps those that talk about Bryan Kohberger based on the sheer craziness of some of the people that are defending Bryan Kohberger. And you know what I saw? I was watching the Night Stalker docu-series on Netflix, and they brought up some of these crazy women who were all infatuated with Richard Ramirez, who did some horrible things. You know, he was not shy about a lot of things. Even in court, established himself as you know, to hail Satan and all this other stuff, right? And the pentagram written on his hands. He was doing this in efforts to maybe, I don't know, intimidate others or whatever the case may be. But yet a lot of these idiots started messaging and writing him in jail, sending him provocative pictures and stuff like that. Like, some people just don't change. Now there's this following for Bryan Kohberger with a bunch of the same type of idiots, men and women, that are in love with the guy. It's insane. It is insane. But maybe perhaps any of the witnesses against Bryan Kohberger, that could be an issue. I know some people are going to bring up maybe there was a co-defendant, maybe there was somebody who narked an informant. I don't think so. I think the only informants that are out there potentially are going to be the folks that utilize that IgG that ended up leading to Bryan Kohberger. That seems like the only thing that they've been wanting to seal mostly, or not have been a part of this case. And I think at the end, that's what's going to end up happening is we're going to find out there really wasn't anybody that knocked out Bryan Kohberger per se. Then again, I mean, maybe one of these females that he was, you know, acting odd with, or one of these students who began to create a tally about Bryan Kohberger's disturbing behaviors during his time at WSU. Maybe perhaps they made a tip, so to speak, at one point that, hey, you might want to look at this guy. He drives a very similar vehicle, and he's been acting very. His behavior has been very disturbing, not just towards teachers, but also towards students, female students at that. And he's got into altercations with his professor. You know, that may be somebody to look into, you know, so maybe perhaps that's the informant. I don't think that there's going to be like an accomplice or anything like that that's going to come forward, and that's going to be the secret guy that he got immunity or something that nobody knows about. No, that's movie like. So That's where we're at on this. I mean, at the end of the day, it's not like in the Richard Allen case where the defense was real open about the things that they wanted out there, so that way it could get the buzz going. Maybe even follow the footsteps of a trial that happened just before that one, where the judge allowed a lot of stuff that maybe perhaps didn't have much evidence to prove outside of suspiciousness into a court that resulted into a hung jury. Maybe perhaps that's the goal. They see something like that happen in one place and continue to try to do something like that, create a conspiracy out there so that way it can taint the jury or whatever the case may be. But all right, let's answer some questions. If you guys have any, put a couple of stars there. I'm pretty back up here. Or an alibi. Yeah. So if he throws out the fact that, the cell service stuff, he basically throws out his alibi as well. That is 100% true. Let's get those likes up, guys. Let's get the likes up. Let's see. Is everybody in a food coma for me? Man, I think I had 2 of them, to be honest with you. Let's see. I doubt the DNA is readable. I mean, it pointed towards Bryan Kohberger as the person. And what was it, like 8 octillion to 1 that it's him? And those are some pretty significant numbers. Now, if I said it, it's like 1,000 to 1 or 1 in a million. Okay, maybe that kind of constitutes that maybe there's not a lot of DNA there or not enough DNA to really prove it in there. But 8 octillion to 1, some pretty wild numbers there. And you don't get that if the DNA is not readable. You don't get that if the DNA is degraded to the point where you can't get anything. That's not consistent. That type of match, which was the turning point for me. So I always thought Bryan Kohberger was guilty after his arrest. I just felt like it was, I was a little bit iffy on his conviction, based on the PCA. It was written kind of weird. I'm not going to lie. I had to go through it myself a few times to kind of understand it and understand why certain things were put in there and why certain things weren't, those type of things. And once I kind of figured it out, to me, I think it was Howard Bloom had said it was a small amount. They couldn't even find it. They had to send it to Othram. And once we got the PCA and we went back and you realize that it wasn't Othram that discovered the DNA. It was actually the Idaho State Lab that discovered it and created the SRT profile and then sent that profile to Othram so that they can do their own IgG stuff. That's what told me at that point, 5 octillion, that's not a small amount of DNA. And even if it is like small in comparisons to maybe some other cases, technology has come a long way. And so this also says to me that either there was enough DNA there or they're not using the same tools or the same technology that they had in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, or even the late 2010s. They're not using that technology. They're using more sophisticated technology that can create a better match and a more accurate match. I think that's one of the things that a lot of folks are missing, is that just because they couldn't do something in the past, law enforcement that is, it doesn't mean that they won't be able to do something in the future. Or maybe just because we don't know about it doesn't mean that other things aren't being utilized now. And there also is the possibility that we just don't understand it. And not understanding it doesn't mean that it's wrong. Right? It just means that some of us are ignorant to some of the things that are being spoken about. And if you're trying to get your information from somebody else who's ignorant, that doesn't know much about law enforcement, legal, anything, and their only expertise is sitting in their mom's basement talking to a phone. I mean, what are we even talking about? You know what I'm saying? It's not even for debate. But yeah, once I got word or it was put out there and published that it was 8 octillion, it's him. It's his DNA. Now, everything else, all right. His DNA is there in the house. And so, in order for it to be Bryan Kohberger to be innocent, we have to believe one of two things. One, that it's just by happenstance and coincidence that the same night he decides to go out, somebody's going to be going out there and is going to commit a quadruple homicide in the way early morning hours. All right. Where there's not so many people out and about, but Bryan Kohberger and this mass killer are out at the same time. While this person is committing the crime, or while this person is in Moscow, Bryan Kohberger's phone is not connected to a tower. That just has to be a coincidence. Then the real mass murderer not only has to be out and about at the same time, have a car similar to his, down to the license plate, but he also is about the same height and weight as Kohberger and has Bryan Kohberger's DNA on his person. I mean, come on now. The chances of all those things being coincidental are astronomical. I think that there's a lot higher chance that DNA at 1 to 8 octillion has a better chance of it being somebody else's than all the stars and everything else align for it not to be Bryan Kohberger. You know, it doesn't take a genius to figure out the case once you see all the things in front of you. Some people need some more help. You know, they need explanation. They need to have it written down and read to them. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, but just because that has to be you and you don't understand it, doesn't mean that the other folks that can see this and can determine based on logic and common sense that they can figure out this case pretty simply. Doesn't mean that we're at your level of intelligence. I'm sorry, but it doesn't. What's going on? What's going on? Did I read that the Apple warrant, they found the receipt in the car? I'm not sure. I have to go through that one. And I wasn't referring to you as the person when you said that the DNA, that you doubt the DNA is readable. I'm not specifically mentioning you as far as that. What I'm saying is there are some people that are putting out some information out there that don't know what they're talking about. How important is the iPad? I'm not sure. It could be important. Goodbye, Jackie. Again, this is one of the people that I'm talking about, that if the information doesn't exist with them, or they don't believe it just because they don't believe it and they can't use common sense to figure it out, that we must be wrong. Or that those that believe that Bryan Kohberger is guilty is wrong. Okay. They're funny. They are funny. I thought they didn't find anything in the car. According to whom? According to Ann Taylor, who at one time said that Bryan Kohberger was an innocent man and has now changed his words to an innocent man right now. That doesn't instill a lot of confidence anymore, does it? When she said that there wasn't anything in the car, she used the word lack. Whether it's total lack or a general lack or a simple lack or some lack or a little lack or whatever you want to call it, lack does not necessarily mean none, right? So if you're an attorney and there is no DNA, why leave it up to the interpretation of the listener to think is lack none or lack a little bit? And if she's playing with words like this, then it probably means there's a little bit. Like, you leave yourself open, a door open for yourself to get out of that statement by saying lack, if there's none. If she said there's none and they end up finding some, and she knew there was some at the time that she mentioned that statement, she can get in some serious trouble. So that's why she's not saying none, she's saying lack. And then we got to, just kind of put a little bit two together. If they're trying to throw it out, wouldn't none be more beneficial to the defense than than the prosecution. And if there was a speck of DNA from the victims in the vehicle, even if it was just a small amount, how damaging would that be to Bryan Kohberger's defense? Because now there's not just his DNA inside of that house on the weapon or on an item that the killer brought into the home, but now perhaps there's either a hair or one of the victims, DNA from one of the victims, or maybe even DNA or hair from one of from Murphy. If one of those exists, even if it's just one strand, even if it's a small amount, that's damning. That's it. It's over. It completes the circle. Let's see. He didn't have an alibi for the time the murders occurred. The totality of circumstantial evidence will convict him. The jury isn't stupid. I agree. And I'm not necessarily saying that those that believe Bryan Kohberger are stupid. They follow, a certain thing. In controversy sells and a bunch of other things. Like, oh, is it possible somebody else did it? Oh, look, there's a new theory. What is this new theory that's come out that somebody in their basement made up without looking at any of the facts? It's just crazy. Let's see. Has there been any news on B's family testify? As far as with the grand jury when it came to Dana Smithers, I don't know what I've heard. One or two things about it. That Bryan Kohberger had a solid rock alibi for that night, so that's not what they're talking to them about. But then why would they talk to them? Like, what's the point? You don't bring up somebody into the grand jury just because you want. Like, oh yeah, hey, this guy has as an alibi, but we're still going to bring him in just in case. That's not how things work. If somebody has something that clears them, well, the prosecution can get it. I'm pretty sure they are. I don't think they have any problems. Do you think we'll hear from BK's sister? I think so. I think we'll hear from at least one of them. I don't know if we'll hear from his father or his mother. And the reason why I don't think we'll hear from his parents is his dad cleared out. So based on Howard Bloom's book, right? And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, Howard Bloom isn't real or whatever the case may be. But he got some things right here. Some things that I was wrong about. I didn't think that the FBI had known who he was until December 19th as well, or maybe even a couple days earlier. But I did not think it was weeks. I did not think that they were following him and had their eye on him or any of those things. And apparently, given the information that's come out of these documents, that ended up being true. So when you read Howard Bloom's book, it sounds like his father, Bryan Kohberger's father, was suspicious of his son. Then you hear the warrants and you find out that Bryan Kohberger's car was the one that was inside their garage and the only vehicle in the garage. And that the other Kohberger family members had their cars out of the garage. Now, it's not like Bryan Kohberger's driving a Mercedes or BMW that he wants to protect from the elements. He's coming from a warm state where there's no salt on the car or something. You know what I mean? He's coming in from Washington, cold state, where his vehicle was out in the elements up until the point where they left. It was just parked outside of his apartment at Steptoe. The Steptoe Apartments. It wasn't in the garage or any of those type of things. And so why garage it? And there's been speculation that he was cleaning his car extensively in that garage. Is he trying to keep that vehicle out of the view, knowing that they're looking for an Elantra? His son is from the area. He's acting weird, wearing gloves all the time. That he perhaps was a new thing for him. I don't know, maybe. I've heard some things about the family members. I can't say one way or another if they're true or not. I believe them to be. And if they are, I think we will end up hearing at least from one of them. That's funny, Emmy. But you're right. That might be one of the persons who does testify. Somebody who really doesn't know him, kind of knew Kohberger family from a distance, and has no basis on reality of any of the thoughts or opinions that he has. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if him and his buddies go up there. I mean, those would probably be the only two that would, or three guys that would go up there and try to, say that Bryan Kohberger was a good man. Daniel, have you heard of the rumor that Bryan being at Walmart at Pullman at 7 a.m. the next day with the Asian or Hispanic woman? Nope. I heard the rumor that he was at Walmart a couple of days earlier buying a Dickies jumpsuit. A couple of days leading up to the murders. The Asian lady girlfriend person or whatever, from what I understand, is if you go and look up that the PhD students that were part of Bryan Kohberger's grouping or whatever, there was one lady who I believe was Asian descent, right? And it was I think it was reported that there was a specific PhD student, which there wasn't very many, that apparently, and this is the rumors that I heard, that Bryan Kohberger was stalking and following around and making feel uncomfortable. So maybe you especially if you work together, I'm sure you don't start off as, oh, hey, this guy's a real creep first day. And I'm not sure that Bryan Kohberger is walking in first day like, oh, hey, I'm gonna kill 4 people later. I have this craziness to me. Probably not. I mean, when you hear stories about, like, for instance, Richard Ramirez, who we talked about earlier, he had friends. Some people started to speculate that it may have been him towards the end as well. Ted Bundy, he had friends and girlfriends and families that thought he was innocent. And so, well, maybe not so much that even before that, they thought he was a good guy before they had all these accusations against him. And so is it possible that Bryan Kohberger came in there and, wasn't a complete creep the first couple of days? Now, he does get on a disciplinary plan or whatever very early, like within 6 weeks. So, I mean, he was fired within what, like August to December? That's a 4-month span. Late August, early September. I mean, it's really more like 3.5, because it wasn't the full month of December either. So it's more like, September, October, November. So about 3, maybe 4 months. You had half a month for December, half a month for August. Not very long. How exactly do you substantiate that joke of an alibi that you claim will be proven through an expert testimony on cell data if you have the cell data suppressed? I don't know. No, it's not real. These are a bunch of people that'll throw anything out there so that they can feel that they're right now. You know very well that at the end of this, Bryan Kohberger is going to be found guilty, and that they're probably going to be yelling, "We are all Bryan Kohberger. Bryan Kohberger's rights are our rights. Every one of us is Bryan Kohberger." It is some stupid crap like that. I wouldn't even be surprised if those type of things aren't being said now. Melba says, on its face, the motion is weak, but because it states that there is no opposition from prosecution, it will likely be granted. Well, this is going to be the just to seal the evidence or what they're trying to say, which again doesn't sound. You don't seal things that are positive, and when it comes to your client, you seal and try to suppress things that are against your client. Was there any search on animal cruelty in the area? I'm not sure. I know there was a dog named Buddy that ended up getting skinned or something like that, and there was some other things. Could that have been Bryan Kohberger? Maybe. I mean, wouldn't it be crazy if that's the dog hair they found in his apartment? Then that would kind of also lead you to believe that, or another sign of escalation, in my opinion. Let's see. I'd love to have me too. If anybody can get in touch with her, I'd love to have her on the show too. No one skinned the dog. Police attributed to wildlife, and so did a vet. They found a wild rabbit not far from the dog in the same condition. Coyotes moving through the air. Makes sense. I haven't really looked into it. Two damaged laptops seized. Asus and ITR laptops from PA's parents' house. Fire sticks and phone data provided in e-trail and additional evidence. Some people will argue that Bryan Kohberger moved out of his house or his apartment, that he wasn't going back, and that those items were property, because the apartment was furnished. So what? Even if that's true, let's just say that's true, right? If they found evidence on the computer tower or the fire stick that was property of that apartment, and those things were searched while the time he was there, or purchased, or whatever the case may have been, doesn't that also kind of prove that he did something? Why would you want to throw it out if there's nothing on there? Makes no sense. Makes no sense. They also have proof he purchased a K-bar knife in eBay. I've heard they found a receipt. I don't know where the receipt is from. I thought it was from Amazon. Could have been from eBay. Could have been. But I heard that they've found the purchase of that K-bar knife. Stevie says, as Daniel's always said, nothing about the car means dilly squat unless you can provide expert testimony to the fact that the car seen circling the house could absolutely not be a 2015. Exactly. You know, it's not like the car morphed. They say, oh, it's a 2011, 2013. And they get Bryan Kohberger's name. Nah, it's a 14 to 16. Let's look at the footage real hard so that way it changes. I don't know. I don't understand the thoughts behind some of the motives behind things. All righty. Catching up on the live. What if throwing out the car evidence is related to the tires? Remember the tread pattern measured outside of the house? That's very possible too. That is very possible. So we have a video of this white Elantra driving around in the area, right? And a lot of people have asked about how many cameras are in that area. I only think there are two. I only think there's one on the 1112 residence and one on Linda Lane. Could there be more? Maybe, possibly. But my speculation is that there's only two, and I'll tell you why. But before I go into that, the reason why this could be damaging is there's a spot where Bryan Kohberger pauses for like 11 seconds or so before he goes on. And when he does that, and he reverses and he turns and he goes back towards the victim's house to then go do that 3-point turn and then come back all the way around and park in the back. When he did that, he was turning the wheel. Now, there's evidence of the white vehicle that you suspect to be the killer's vehicle. You have a timestamp, and you have video evidence of where that vehicle was and the motion in which the vehicle was making. So obviously, if they're parked at a certain direction and then you hear the wheel turn and they start moving to the left forward, that means that they turned the wheel to the left. You don't have to visibly see the wheel turn to the left to determine that they had turned the wheel to the left. Same thing for the right turns. Right. You don't necessarily have to see it, because some people are going to say, oh, well, how do you know that tire mark or whatever, how do you know it was his that turned that direction? Well, vehicle went to the left. And so you have a timestamp, you have when that happened. And as we spoke to the CSI, retired CSI Steve from True Crime Web, when that happens, pieces of the compound of the tire are left behind. And so is it possible that they now have that location? They can find those marks where the vehicle turned its tires. They had those compound. They were able to measure it to the car. And that can prove that that car and those tires were the ones that made that motion and that move on the Linda Lane footage at, what was it, like 4:02 or something like that in the morning. Now, the reason why I think that there was only 2 cameras out there is because, well, one, we've seen the Linda Lane, but 2, you look at the probable cause affidavit, when they describe what Bryan Kohberger potentially does there in front of the house when he's coming back, they say that he is either attempting to park or do another 3-point turn. He fails at whatever it is that he's doing, goes and does a 3-point turn at the King Queen Road residence, and then goes back towards the victim's house. What it doesn't say is that it goes around and parks in the back, which is what you can see. And 2, it leaves it up to the possibility of a park or a 3-point turn when he was coming back. And they don't know that. And so if they had cameras on the house, whether it was the front or the back, you'd be able to determine if he was trying to park or do a 3-point turn. So what I assume is happening is you have the 1112 King Road residence, 1112 light that's facing the camera light that's facing the King Queen Road residence. What I'm assuming is you probably see the headlights coming back, and then you see the headlights facing one way or another, and you can't really tell if they're trying to park or do a 3-point turn. It's all you can see is just the headlights on the houses nearby, which is why they can't tell, which is why they had questioned so much of the entry point for a while when it came to this case. So, yeah, I think that's very much could possibly be it. And is that something that you want thrown out if, even if there's no DNA in the car? And I think that's a huge yes. You want that information thrown out because that puts him there. That puts him and his car, because he put himself out driving around in his car that night by himself. That puts him there in that location in the white car around the time when these murders happened. And that would be detrimental to his defense. So good call out there. Che, I appreciate it. That was a good call out there because it definitely could be, so when I said that, it has to outweigh the DNA, my opinion, that would have to outweigh the DNA. That could outweigh the DNA because it points to a lot. Let's see. Just want to see if I'm missing anything. Almost to the bottom, actually. How's it going, everybody? Good to see everyone. Patrick goes, but Daniel, don't you know he was set up? He was framed by the multitude of officers and agencies working together. They all agreed not to whistleblow, where a group framed him and the rest stupid. Yeah, no, I think that the frame job is the most idiotic thought that could possibly be out there in this case. Because, the frame job is an answer to the pro-burgers as why they think I'm going to call him Kohberger is innocent, right? They can't come up with any other thought that, oh man, he had to have been framed because all the evidence points to him. And so they don't answer the questions though when it comes to the frame job. Like, all right, why, when, where, and how, right? So why did they choose Bryan Kohberger to be their patsy in a frame job when you have, like, how do they even know who he was? Moscow Police Department to frame him, and if they did, let's just say they found him as a patsy, they would have had to have gotten lucky that he was out and about the night that he was, and his phone lost service, and that his vehicle matched the vehicle that was seen in the area. Those things would have had to have aligned for them to say, all right, this is the guy we got. Now, the other thing is, when did they decide that they were going to do the frame job, right? So they get there that morning. Idaho State Police have already been contacted. The Idaho State Forensic Team is on the way to collect all the information and all the DNA. So when did they decide that they were going to choose Bryan Kohberger as the patsy? Had to have been early on. Now, how would they have gotten his DNA to transport onto that knife sheath if he reportedly to himself was all by himself throughout the entire night driving around? And once they got that DNA, they would have had to have planted it on the knife sheath before the Idaho State Lab collected it. And if they didn't, they would have had to have broken into Moscow Police Department, that is, into the Idaho State Lab, laboratory, highly secured laboratory. Then they would have to switch out the DNA or whatever the case may have been at some point there before they found the DNA. Because once, and how long did it take for them to find the DNA? Let's just say it took them a day. So they would have had to have gone in there, added Bryan Kohberger's DNA within a day of it being collected before they can determine before it was entered into a national database of individuals, so they can see if there's a match called CODIS. And if they didn't do that, let's just say they were like, oh, well, we don't know who it is. Let's just say, because I'm going to ask, why did the frame happen? And if the answer is because the school, University of Idaho, was just hard on getting an answer and a killer off the street that they would take anybody. Well, how long did that process take of giving the police enough time to investigate and figure it out on their own before the college decided, hey, this is long enough, like a day? Hey, we haven't solved this. There's a lot of pressure. We've had one day. Let's go figure out some guy we can blame. Right. And let's just say that they don't get to it in time before the state of Idaho State Forensic Team collects it, before they find the DNA, before they enter it into CODIS. Then Moscow Police Department, let's just say it took a couple of weeks, because I think that's what a lot of people were saying. Like, hey, Thanksgiving came around, Christmas was coming around. They wanted to make sure people came back in January. So let's just say they decided after, December 1st. So let's just say they found on December 1st, they're like, all right, it's been too long. We need to find a patsy. Who do we pick? And they somehow just pick up Bryan Kohberger out of the air. But they pick him up and they're like, all right, well, we need to put his DNA. We have to match his DNA to the DNA that they found on the sheath. So what we're going to do is we're going to go break into a national database and into the Idaho State Lab, Mission Impossible style, and resequence the DNA that was found on the sheath that created the STR profile, and the STR profile that was entered into a national database monitored by multiple agencies across the nation. And then the question is, why Bryan Kohberger? I know a lot of people have told me, well, one person told me that Bryan Kohberger had applied for Moscow Police Department. I was like, no, he didn't. He applied for Pullman Police Department. And this person was bright enough to tell me that the reason that Payne knew Bryan Kohberger is because Bryan applied at Moscow Police Department, and after their interview, they decided to have beers together, and that's how they got his DNA. I was just like, where do you come up with these stories? But at the end of the day, it is impossible. It is impossible for any of those things to be true. Any of them. Even if they decided Bryan Kohberger is going to be your patsy, we would have to believe that the Moscow Police Department decided to overlook their entire database of people they have arrested. Some that have been arrested for murder. There was one guy in particular who had been arrested for murder, spent like 3 or 4 years in prison, and then was released and lived, somewhat close to the area. And after the murders, he allegedly attempted to stab himself and his wife. That guy was no one would believe him doing it, but everybody would believe a PhD student studying criminology in the neighboring town. That's who you want to go for. Man, I mean, it sounds like the plot of Gridlock. If you guys don't know what Gridlock is, that was a movie with Tupac back when he was alive and he was a detective, and they kill somebody, right? And see, this is the other thing too. I think the police would have had to have been involved in this murder. We don't know why they would have done this for, but let's just go with it. These detectives in Gridlock kill undercover agent who was selling drugs to them. Now, they didn't know he was an undercover agent. They just, what they had been doing was they're going out there, they were buying drugs, and then they were busting those people, putting them in jail, and then going and sell the drugs out on the street. And what ended up happening was they ended up getting involved with an undercover. When they try to, jack him up, it came down to one of the officers having to kill him and shoot the undercover officer. Wasn't known until the next day when those, homicide detectives end up getting the case on the person that they killed, and they find out that it's a cop. Now they're in charge of finding somebody who is a patsy, or they're in charge of finding the real killer, but they're the killer, so they're going to find a patsy. They decide to choose a homeless man that nobody knows about, nobody cares about. He ends up being like a doctor or an attorney who kind of lost it and just took off, became a drunk, and was out on the, was a homeless man in LA, and he had a very wealthy family who, once they found him, they bought him the best of lawyers, and they figured out that it actually wasn't him, and that these officers were the ones who were framing him. I thought that movie, the plot of that movie was a little bit of a stretch. Just try to say that happens in real life. Like, God almighty. I don't know how slow some of these folks have to be to really believe something like that. Hey, Dana, I know you're not about psychics. However, did you ever go back and listen to Dana Sarafina? It would be fun for you to have her on our show. Is that the psychic sleuth or something like that? Crimes. I got some info. I had one of, so we're on Discord. For if you guys want to be a members, I just put it out in the members chat yesterday of our Discord, and we have a couple of things that we talk about. We talk about the Bryan Kohberger case. We're going to talk about the Karen Reed case here soon too. We'll be covering that case and looking at it from a logical explanation or logical point, and see what's really going on there. But in our Bryan Kohberger chat, one of the mods and followers of the show had put on some information from a psychic that I went through. I think some of it is really weird and interesting. Like, the person came out with the name of like Braden or something like that, and they talked about like heroin. They also talked about they talked about alcohol and whiskey. So they also talked about this person being either very old or just a little bit older than them. And to me, I'll be honest with you, maybe not the name. The names kind of throw me off a little bit. I was like, that's interesting. But the rest of the stuff that they were talking about, I could have made up myself at that moment and that time. Older white male. I believe that's what I had said early on here. Somebody who's not affiliated with these people. They don't know who they are, who this guy is. And the reason I had said that is because there was no arrest made and people were getting cleared. And I said it then. I was like, and this was very quickly. People were getting cleared. I was like, that tells me that the person that committed this crime is a lot further from the circle, from that inner circle of the victim than you would think. Because there's evidence that, things have to happen for a crime to be committed. One, the person has to be out and about at that odd hour, like Bryan Kohberger. Somebody has to be unexplainably in the area, kind of like Bryan Kohberger. You can't explain where he's at all. But during that odd hour and during that time that the murders happened, his phone is off. You gotta have to get there, right? And so, you get some video from the neighborhood. Is there a vehicle or a person walking in that direction that matches your suspect? And you have that for Bryan Kohberger. All these things have to happen. And so if you had an idea that it was, for instance, Jack Decor, and you had a video of his apartment or his house or whatever the case may be facing that direction, and you don't see him ever leave that house, and he's in there and he has a bunch of other things that prove that he was at home or whatever the case may have been, and they were able to clear him. I mean, they would have been able to have determined it was him fairly quickly if it was him. There's some things that have to happen. Like I mentioned, he'd have to leave his house. He'd have to get there. We would see, a video of somebody walking there. We wouldn't see a video of a vehicle passing by so many times. You know what I mean? And so, because those things don't exist, you're left with what we have. And it's pretty obvious. And well, anyways, there got out of where I was going. And so when you have all those things, you can deduce that all right, this person isn't close. This person is somebody far away. Chances are they're going to be an older white male. And the reason why I base that on is the fact that to me, it seemed like it was a serial killer. And not saying that it's not, 100%. It's always a white male, older guy, or whatever the case may be, or older than their victims to a certain extent, unless they're hunting elderly. I mean, we just talked about Richard Ramirez, and there's some other folks of other descent that have committed crimes like this. But I just, that the profile would have fit this direction. And I would have thought that it was going to be a serial killer. Very, very early, I thought this was probably a drifter, somebody who followed them, but maybe perhaps isn't from that area, because the layout of the area is a little bit tricky, to get there, to be there at the right time, and all these other things. It just seemed like it was very meticulously put together, and we knew that there was a knife involved, which the person also said, "Hey, my chest hurts. I'm having a hard time breathing." I mean, those are all things that could have been deduced based on the information that's out there. Now, I'm not saying that psychics aren't real. I just say that because, like I mentioned, she mentioned the name of like Braden, and then she mentioned whiskey. She mentioned somebody drunk. She mentioned a boyfriend or somebody getting into an altercation somewhere. These are all things that were speculatory very early on. And so it sounded like a lot of things thrown up. And then as more information came about the case, it became to narrow itself down. And I'm not saying that these people believe that they're not psychic. They may think they really are, because everything that they're saying, ends up coming out true. Kind of like when I do my psychic thing, when I say, all right, this is what the defense is going to say in 6 months, and it comes true. Or, hey, this is what happens, because of this. And then I break it down. Like, this is why I think that. And the only thing that they're not saying is this is why I think that. But I don't know. I'll look into her. I'll see what's up. I'm open to psychics. Let's see. I know why the guy opened the snap on the sheath barehanded too. He was afraid he was going to pop the fingertip off of that nitrate glove, flicking it open. Maybe. I just think that he was playing with the sheath, and when he got it, and but yeah, that makes sense too. Let's see. I believe this. I don't know who that is. Okay, big Kohberger advocate. So are her viewers. I'm gonna go to her channel again and just write. I don't know who that is. I think I actually do know who that is. As a lawyer, right? I have nothing against anybody, defense lawyers or not, but they're defense lawyers at the end of the day. If they come out and they start saying everybody that they see is guilty, and they go through the evidence as if they are, who's going to really go to them and hire them as a defense attorney? YouTube, if you're a defense attorney, YouTube takes a lot of time and effort and things of that nature. I have little time because I own a business. I do quite a bit of things, and my time is a little bit spread out to do this. I would imagine a lawyer's time, if they had cases constantly coming in, would be a lot harder to do. You wouldn't be able to go to these cases and sit in there, follow them as closely as you do if you had your own cases. So I don't know. Is she retired? Is she not? Maybe she doesn't have that many people hiring her in her area. I don't know. I don't want to call shots against anybody and say, oh, they don't know anything or they don't. At the end of the day, defense attorneys are going to, like, for instance, if I was still a police officer and I was still in law enforcement, I'd understand why, and I probably would be more biased to law enforcement. But I'm not a practicing officer anymore. I haven't been for a very long time. And I said practicing officer because, well, you do need a license to be a police officer. You need a peace officer license. So I not been in that realm of work for a very long time. And so, although I tend to believe, more so than not, but I am open and understand that there are some people that are bad out there, even police officers that don't always do things right. And that there's the possibility. But I look at everything open-minded. I don't look at it from one perspective. And I think a big indication is the Richard Allen case. I said when the PCA came out that guy was guilty of sin. The Franks motion came out that wasn't sealed by Richard Allen's defense attorneys. Made me pause a little bit, especially about the Elvis Field stuff. I was open about it, and I said, hey, I was like 99.9% sure this guy did it. And I'm a little bit, 80, 75 is kind of, my confidence is coming down a little bit. The more I looked into it and more that I saw that, the possibility of it being these specific people, there's just no evidence there. And they were investigated, and you would have to believe that the cops in that scenario there were also trying to hide certain things and a bunch of other stuff in multiple law enforcement places. And I understand that there was a what's the word I'm looking for? Disagreement about the way the case was going with the FBI and other agencies. But once they figured out that it was Richard Allen and looked at the evidence there, I'm not sure if they would have still had the same feelings about Brad Holder and those other guys if they were still on the case when this broke. You're supposed to be open-minded as a police officer or investigator to make sure that if something does come in and it were to exclude or be exculpatory to the the person that you're filing charges on, I don't know. To me, I just think that both of these cases ended up at the end. When it came to the Richard Allen case, I was back to about 99% before the trial started. I'd already given up on that. I'd seen the crime scene photos. I'd seen the sticks. I saw the body positions. None of that reminded me anything of anything there as far as Odinism or anything like that. Some people were trying to pull, dots together saying that, you have a hangman and you have a magician tarot card and a bunch of other things. And it just didn't make any sense. It was just like, you'd have to believe a bunch of different origin theories or different cults and mix them all together to produce one and then attribute one of these guys to all three of those different types of cults or whatever you want to call them. And it just doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, as far as like defense attorneys and stuff, I don't know. I've yet to see one say that in a high profile case that no, the guy did it. Once I see that, maybe those lawyers I'll be moving more open to. But to a hammer, everything's a nail. And if you're a defense attorney, everybody that says they're innocent, you have to believe it, and you have to portray it, and you have to defend them as if. Kind of off subject, but no less important. Can someone tell me where the name Reggie came from, or is it short from? I love the name. Oh, Rogie, I think you mean. So that's my little one, little Rogan. If anybody has that emoji, put them in there. It's her second Christmas coming up, and I know we've had a lot of folks who have reached out already and bought, and we're so blessed, bought her stuff already, and thank you for everybody who has. But they've asked, hey, can we get a link to send little Rogan something? And yeah. So we put the link in there. It's in the description. It's also in the live chat pinned up. But her name. So I have 3 daughters, right? I have 2 much older daughters. One's about to graduate. The other one is about to be 15, coming up soon. And so, and then I have my 1.5-year-old. And so, believe it or not, I'm quite a bit older than probably most of you guys think. But yeah, we started over with Rogan. My middle child had red hair, or has red hair, bright red hair, and I don't know. I thought there was a good chance that little Rogie was going to have red hair, and so when we were looking up names and stuff, we found the name Rogan, which I also like Joe Rogan. And my wife wanted a boy, and she was a girl, which she don't mind now, but she wanted to give her a boy's name. It was going to be either like Charlie or something else, and I was just like, let's just go with Rogan. We found it. It kind of means somebody with red hair, even though she don't have red hair. But that was the name we chose before she was born. Yeah, no, it's speaking of like Norwegian places and stuff like that. It's actually, I think, one of the a northern Nick name or something like that, from up there. So it is what it is. I love the name. I think his family is going to have to testify. Absolutely. That's possible. That's possible. Let's see. But did anybody testify in the Richard Allen? Well, yeah, I think his daughter did, right? His daughter and his sister to testify that they weren't assaulted. The thing is, if they go up there and they testify against Bryan Kohberger or for Bryan Kohberger on the defense, they open themselves up for cross-examination by the prosecution, where they can bring up a lot of questions about Bryan Kohberger's past, which includes some of the things like his lack of remorse, his feelings, fights he got with his parents, the theft arrest that he had of his sister's cell phone, those type of things, his drug use. And I'm not sure if that's going to be beneficial to him compared to whatever they could say. Oh, he's a great kid. He's this. I don't know. The other rumor the person claimed was that there was a witness who saw him standing by the Red Wolf Bridge dumping items. I've never heard that. Could be true. It could be not. I don't know. I've never heard that. That's the first time I've ever heard that. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not true. It's just I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that rumor. Spooky says, defense team, if you are so sure he is innocent and you have hundreds of hours and many, many experts and a huge amount of education and studying for all these myths, who is the suspect? Yeah. Who is the suspect? Your evidence. So who did you find to be the suspect based on all the information? And again, it's not their job to solve the case or anything like that if it wasn't Bryan Kohberger. But when you have such a robust amount of evidence against him, if you have anything that could side with you, you're probably going to want to bring it up. Wasn't there a possibility that Kohberger changed his tires afterwards? Well, he went and got his oil changed or something like that. And a lot of people thought maybe he would have changed his tires then as well. I don't know if that's true or not. I know that he did go to a place to get his car service. But let's just say that the FBI were watching him and they saw him get this thing serviced. They could have kept an eye on that place until they got a warrant, which it wasn't very long, because I think he got into Pennsylvania on the 16th. By the 19th, Moscow Police Department was aware, and the 23rd they were out there. So they were watching him, and they knew within a week that that's where he went. And they knew the type of tires or whatever the case may have been that he was riding in. Perhaps they could find him in that location, even if he turned them in. They don't necessarily get burnt right away. And if the only reason that he was replacing them was because he committed a murder and there was still life on them, some tire shops recycle those and resell them. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did something similar where they had it in the recycle place, or I don't know. And they could have found him. But yeah, even if he did, there's a process to going and finding him again. Do the inmates get fed Thanksgiving dinner? I have no idea. None whatsoever. If anybody who's worked in corrections or been in jail at a prison or a county jail or some sort, and you've been there through Thanksgiving, what kind of meals do you guys get? Daniel, how much credence do you put on BK being implicated in the theory on stolen supplies from WSU Science Lab? I've experienced working at the college campus lab. It's inventory meticulously. Well, yeah, most of them are, but here's the thing. You would have had to have known. When did the inventories happen? I think we looked up that in WSU, the inventories happen twice a year. And when he's driving on, when his phone turns off and he's driving on South Nevada Street, let me see if I can pull this up real quick. It's a good question. So I want to pull this up right. Go to Google Earth real quick and I'll bring up where the science lab is and everything else that goes along with that. Okay. Apparently there's like a new thing. I don't. All right. Idaho 4. Let's open this up. All right. Okay. So right here, Bryan Kohberger is traveling north at 2:44 a.m. And then he heads back this way and then heads towards SR 277, which or SR, I think that's what it was, 277 or 27, whatever, that heads back to Moscow. The thing is, he's over here for about like 12 to 13 minutes, right? The WSU lab is right here at Simpson's Hall, I believe. And so he's heading that direction towards the hall. Now, where the WSU lab is. So it's literally right there where he's driving towards, and then he's coming back from. Now, what's also in there in that chem lab are things like office supplies, everything. I mean, it was everything that was in there: chemicals, office supplies, janitorial things, stuff that, everything, including, in my opinion, based on what I could find, it sounds like they had some other things in there that may have been beneficial. For instance, it could have been maybe walkie-talkies, radios that connect to 911 Whitcomb. Remember, everything there: Moscow Police Department, Pullman Police Department, WSU Police, Idaho, University of Idaho Police, all of their 911 calls and information went through Whitcomb 911 and Pullman. And so if he had access to one of their radios, so to speak, he would have been able to listen into a lot of things that were going on there. But chemicals and things of that nature, that's quite a bit of a possibility. Remember, they found some ID cards that were in a glove inside of a box back at his parents' house. My speculation is that was what got him into that place. Now, he would just need to make sure that if he took or used anything, that it's back before it's inventoried. It was a Sunday morning, and he went out and about. Is it possible that he went back at some point, left back the walkie-talkie or any chemicals that he may have taken from there, if he took any? So I honestly think that there's a pretty good possibility that he did go there. Howard Bloom had mentioned it to us that was a situation. I heard about that before Howard Bloom mentioned it. I've already known that there was a possibility he broke into the somewhere in WSU. And what I didn't know exactly was the chem lab. I thought it was honestly, me personally, I thought it was like an office or something that would help him get materials like the dispatch walkie-talkie and stuff like that. But it wasn't until Howard Bloom mentioned the chem lab, and we did a deep dive and we looked at what is stored in that chem lab, that we were like, all right, and the location of it, that we're like, all right, this seems to too much of a coincidence for it not to be something there. Howard Bloom says it's supposed to drop pretty soon. I'm not entirely sure. Sirius Black comes in with a $5 super chat. I would like to know what serial K's he studied under Ramsland. Well, BTK is definitely one of them. I would, you would assume that the major, the big high profile ones would be the ones you would know about. I mean, Hyman would be the one to tell us, everybody that's out there, but you have the Bundys, you have the Gaines, you have the Golden State, probably even the Zodiac, Richard Ramirez. I mean, Israel Keys. There's probably a lot of folks that they're talking about, and maybe some things that are consistent and what got them caught and things of that nature. There's a lot that can go into there. I do find it interesting that there's seemingly never any mention of possibility that the evidence from the crimes before 1122 King Road could be present in the Elantra that hurt the defense too. That's true, Johnny. You got a point there. Huh. It'd be the magic everything, the magic car, the magic sheath, the magic everything. I see early on when they first got BK, his dad said in an interview that he had tires changed on BK's car in PA before they got home. Send me that interview. I'm not familiar with it. If you know where that's at, please. No problem. I hope you're doing well, Shay. Let's see. And she's the newest member. Thank you for joining. Check out the Discord. It's in our community post under members, and you'll see the Discord link. Come on in and join us. Let's see. I'm almost towards the end. Where they found the touch DNA isn't from just somebody randomly touching the sheath. It was a place where he didn't think about it ever being. Who would? Yeah. And the fact that it's single source is a huge thing too, right? Because for it to have transferred onto that item, there had to have been a way of getting there. They would have had to have transferred it somehow. And typically that would be on the person by another person. So if he would have touched the doorknob, somebody else would have had to touch the same doorknob and got Bryan Kohberger's DNA on them. Or if he brushed up against them and, they rubbed shoulders or something. Well, you would also have the DNA of the killer in that moment too. It's just it doesn't make any sense. Let's see. I handled Kim. I'm not sure who that is. Let's see. There isn't a traffic stop video that's still under gag order. And if so, why? Cheers. I don't know if there's a traffic stop still under gag or we just don't know about it yet. I mean, there could be a possibility of one that we don't know about. What if it was a neighbor that lived on Taylor, who was also a resident in Latah, has disdain for sorority girls, ex-military, early 30s? Is that the guy that stabbed his wife and committed murder? Also, the one I spoke about earlier? Again, wouldn't those people seem more logical than framing Bryan Kohberger? Like, if you're going to frame somebody, wouldn't it be the person like you mentioned here? Are we all drunk tonight? No. Believe it or not, I don't really drink that much. Despite the title of the show. Oh, yeah. Stevie's right. So Stevie says, Daniel, don't be silly. They framed him for being transphobic because he looked at a gay rights poster and gave it the stink eye. They said, oh, hell no. Quad homicide with a side of DP for you. Yeah, that's exactly what somebody told me. They said that the reason why the WSU was kicking him out is because he gave a stink eye to some sort of LGBTQ pro LGBTQ poster, and that he looked at it weird. And then in that moment, they knew they had to get rid of him. Yeah, it's absolutely true. I've had that been told to me more than once. Let's see. When I first met you, I thought you may have been a pro burger. Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, a lot of people thought I was perhaps a pro burger, or maybe not even a pro burger. I'm the one that created the name pro burger, by the way. I should have copywritten that. Maybe I still can, because it's on video when I came up with it. I got tired of saying pro Kohbergers, and so I came up with the name Pro Burger on live in the moment, and everybody, you know, it seemed to run with it, which is awesome. But a lot of people confused me having a guest with me agreeing with their side of things, and that's not necessarily the case. I'll bring on a guest who doesn't agree with me, just to get an insight on what it is that they do think, and you know, maybe perhaps I am seeing something I don't understand, and also maybe perhaps there's something else that I can debunk. You know, I look at it from all different views. You know, I've had some folks that were on here that, you know, I verified who they were, but just because you verify who they are and they might be from the area ish doesn't mean they know anything. Like, for instance, there was a pregnant lady who went missing with her boyfriend a couple months back, maybe around, no, I think it was a year ago, actually. I think this was around Christmas last year. And they end up finding them deceased, shot in a vehicle in some random apartment parking lot. And what do you call it? Man, where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. So they were found there, and I live, I don't know, a few miles away from there. If somebody were to say, hey, you know what, Daniel, let's verify who you are. Do you even live in the area? Yeah, I do. I live in the area. I'm pretty close, blah, blah, blah. Does that necessarily mean I know anything? No. Now, I heard some rumors that were going around just because of the proximity of where I lived, but does that mean that any of those are true either? No. And so when I had some people coming up on the show that lived close in proximity, it's like, all right, maybe you can bring some sort of value. You are from the area. But in these two situations where I did that, I didn't find the stories credible at all. And it took me a little bit to figure that out. Not necessarily because I needed to figure something out, but I needed to know, like, hey, is everything that this person is saying truthful? And I had one guy tell me that he got word early in the morning, blah, 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 blah. And over time, I figured out where he worked. And over time, I was able to confirm that the store didn't open as early as he said it did on that date. And I was able to confirm that the day that he didn't go to work was actually the day after, which I brought it up to everybody's attention. I was like, hey, this guy came on here. He was able to verify that he was a University of Idaho student at least at one point. And I don't necessarily think that, and I'm not necessarily saying that he was lying. I thought that, and I've said it multiple times, I think he was mistaken. When it came to the other person, she definitely is who she said she is. That doesn't necessarily mean that she has any information. And so, I brought them on based on who they were. And I may have used the wrong word or term when I say I vetted them. And I should have said I verified who they are, because that's what I meant. I vetted who they were. I was able to see a connection on one person based on the people that she mentioned. I was able to trace those people back to her. But those people that she mentioned may not have known anything at all. And which is one of the things I started saying very early on. I was like, everything that she's saying is, word of one person from another. But because I had her on the show to question those things and ask her those things, a lot of people assume that I agreed or aligned with those things, and that was far from the truth. You know, I've had persons who thought Richard Allen was innocent and persons who thought Richard Allen was guilty on the show in different times. Same thing with BK. At the end of the day, I only I only align with myself, you know, and you know there might be some things that I align with others, but at the end of the day, I align with myself and what I bring out there. I don't align with anybody else's theories or thoughts. Not saying that our theories and thoughts don't align together, that they're not on the same page. That's just that whether I bring somebody on, whether they think the person's innocent or guilty, those are their thoughts and opinions. You know, this is a podcast. We're not detectives or anything like that. Unbeknownst to some of the people who think they are, there are some there are some persons on YouTube who literally think that they woke up every morning, put on their khaki suit, and went out there and try to solve this crime. And that if they didn't hear about it, it ain't real. That's not who we are. We're a commentary. We give up our opinions and thoughts and based off of logic and stuff like that. But like I think I told somebody, I was like, hey, you know, if I don't know, BTK wanted to do an interview, I'd interview him. Doesn't mean I align with him or agree with anything that he did, but I would interview him to get an idea and understanding of perhaps what goes through the mind of somebody like this. You know, what to look for in a person. You know, like there had to have been some signs here and there. In BTK, he was cross-dressing and tying himself up. That's a pretty big sign of some things, right? He was binding himself and photographing himself in weird positions and things of that nature. Not necessarily saying that was out in the open, but some people knew about it. It was discovered before. I think his wife did. And, you know, how many of those moments did he have with other people where he should have or could have been caught, and why weren't they? You know, those type of things. So I wouldn't put a lot of stake into who I bring on as far as where I align myself. I just align myself on truth and common sense. Let's see. We'll answer a few more. I'm almost to the bottom. Almost to the bottom. I do think it's an interesting theory in regards to the science lab supplies being used. I think it's more of an interesting theory once we find out how close that science lab or the chem lab was to where he was seen on camera when his phone went out. I think that's telling. I think that's real telling. And Mark is absolutely correct. There's been a lot of stuff that's been redacted out of Pullman PD's crime log. Quite a bit. And you can't really do that without a court order. Could it be a different case that they're doing it for? Maybe. But I think it specifically goes back to, you know, around the time Bryan Kohberger was involved. Let's see. But yeah, no, I'm no pro burger. Like I said, I came up with that name. Stevie says the TV producer that broke the ID story told Jen Koffendorfer ID was related to the house. Xana and Maddie were the only holdovers, and he could have easy access to the house over the summer. I can say that I was told specifically by somebody I truly trust, and I really believe the information that this person has said to me was that and they've not steered me wrong on anything. Truth be told, guys, I do know some people that are from the area that may know some things. People that are I mean, we all know who I have talked to in the past, family members, but those aren't the only family members that I've spoken to. Those aren't the only neighbors that I've spoken to. Those aren't the only students in different colleges that I've spoken to. But for what I was told by somebody I really believe is that the ID cards that were found didn't belong to these victims. And the term was these, or something very similar to these, could be something else. But specifically saying that the 4 victims who or even Dylan and Bethany as well, that the IDs did not belong to those victims. That led me to believe, they didn't tell me this, nobody's told me this, but based on the way they emphasized on that type of verbiage, told me that they belonged to other victims of Bryan Kohberger's. Now, a victim of Bryan Kohberger's doesn't necessarily mean that they were murdered or anything like that. They could have been a victim of a burglary, a victim of a theft, a victim of stalking that they didn't even know about. And so there's a lot of things that could be played there. But if it was specific to this case, having those IDs, let's just say, and this is 100% my theory, but let's just say that these are IDs to get access into the WSU crime lab. And they found out about that. They found out that he used walkie-talkies or something. Wouldn't those IDs have something to do with this case then? Even though they're not necessarily the victims? Possibly. That's a good point there, Stevie. All right, I'm going to answer just 2 more, unless you have a super chat coming in. What is your current opinion on the Elantra in Oregon? There's a channel that has put out some new info on it. It's not related. So when did that come out, right? That white Elantra came out around the 21st of December. That's around the time that they got Bryan Kohberger's information. And they knew that he had a vehicle that matched the description. The reason they didn't send anybody out there is because somebody probably went out there and got the VIN number and didn't match it. The only information that anybody's been able to pull up on it is that it belonged to somebody or was registered to somebody in the state of Colorado. And that at one point, the victim's houses were, I guess, owned by a company. One of the main guys in that company lived in another random city in Colorado. They have nothing together except that they live in the city or in the state of Colorado. At one point, the investor that put up money for this for the house is from one random place in Colorado, and that Eugene, Oregon was registered somewhere in Colorado. 2 different people, 2 different states, 2 different everything. Just the fact that they're both from Colorado. That is too much of a coincidence, yet these pro-burgers say that Bryan Kohberger being out there the same time that the murders happened, his phone being off at the same time, his car being seen on camera, his DNA in the house on the device that was brought in by the killer. That's not enough of a coincidence. That's very plausible of a coincidence. But the mere fact that white Elantra in Oregon, 4 or 5 hours away, has some sort of roots leading to Colorado, and so does the victim's house, even though it's different parts and different people of Colorado, just so happen to be Colorado. And that's too much of a coincidence. That coincidence outweighs the other. Yeah. Didn't they charge burglary for BK, which could be for the chem lab? I think what they charged him for is because of what they're trying to say is that he intended on hurting somebody inside of that house when he entered. That the intent wasn't to be like just a random burglary, like a theft or something like that. And so, like here in Texas, again, I used to be a police officer here in Texas, and it was quite a bit ago, so a lot of things have changed. But in Texas, we have something called felony burglary. And in order for it to be felony burglary, there has to be another felony attributed into the intent of the burglary. So, for instance, if somebody were to get assaulted sexually, or the hard R, the big R, in Texas, that's a second-degree felony, at least about 10 years ago when I was in law enforcement, or a little bit longer than that. Well, anyways, when I was in law enforcement, it was a second-degree felony. Felony burglary is a first-degree felony. And so first-degree felony is, if somebody were to break into the house in an attempt to hurt, kill, assault sexually, or kidnap, things like that, that it enhances the burglary to a first-degree burglary. And so you would see a higher punishment and a higher charge for first-degree burglary versus second-degree burglary, or second-degree sexual assault. And so, to me, if the rules are somewhat similar in Idaho, that's the reason why they're doing that, is to show intent, that his intent was to go in there and commit this heinous crime. And that was the outcome, obviously. All righty, guys. I'm at an hour and 41 minutes, a lot longer than I thought. Please hit that like and subscribe button. My wife was right. I told her, it's probably be a short one. And she's like, well, every time you say that, it's like over an hour. And she was right, yes, yet again. But I hope you guys had a fantastic Thanksgiving. I'll be back maybe this weekend, do a members only show, answer y'all's questions only. So make sure you join, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, the whole 9 yards. I appreciate everybody being out here. Thank you, guys. And we'll be back next time. Without further ado, peace.